understanding how to work like the toes and the tips of the bands has been something that kind of I've been focused on for the last, say, 15 years of my career. You know, like obviously I've been practicing like 35, and it took me a long while to understand like why aren't people releasing if I'm working, you know, like say 25 years ago, if you'd have described that person, I would have been, oh, let's stick our elbow into their hip and just work it really hard. And but sometimes you can actually bruise people like that because you're not getting the roots of the tension out. And that's kind of what I discovered. And so my focus is actually, if anybody asks me, oh, what have you been focusing on? It's kind of like trying to get the very tips of those bands out, because it's kind of like a domino effect or something. Once you get that bottom, once you get that looseness out of the very end of a band, which would be the very tip, as I mentioned before, then it's much easier for the whole band to start to relax. It starts to melt like butter, although I still think with him, it's still going to take some time. But if he's got a high pain threshold too, it's going to be a lot easier. You can work him quite deeply as long as you're not bruising or anything like that. But yeah, that's been the main focus, and a lot of that does require tuning in. It took me a long while to understand, like when we were talking about back when we were talking about just the energy flow and what Raynor Massage is probably more specifically designed to affect the energy flow in the body, because we believe that the blockage in the energy flow is going to create muscle tightness anyway. And so when you're working on the very end of a band like that, one of the key characteristics or skills that's required is having a sense of, I guess you could call it empathy, but it's also like more tuning into that life force, whether we call it the chi, the ki, the prana, the sen, and understanding how that is on that, because it's a very fine point. Even in psychology, where they look at the brain and our nerves, we have a lot of nerves at the very tips of our fingers. So it occupies a large part of our brain. But from our point of view, it's a very important area, and the tips of the toes. You know, we sense things a lot. So understanding and feeling that life force when you're working on it with either a chopstick or a tie. I use these, I don't know if I have one here, but I use these like pointed acupressure pins a lot now. I've changed a little bit from using chopsticks to these tools, and they're very fine and precise. And I can send a link to you guys if you're not familiar with them. But I'm using them in that last video there with Brock, and it's like a very fine acupressure pin, and I'm using it right on that point, and then working out from there. And I spend a lot of time just holding that, getting the person to breathe into it. And sometimes people will have huge energy releases just from like breathing into that point while you're holding it. And then, but it's the roots of the tension, and so it unleashes that domino effect. But then one makes it a lot easier to release higher up into the bands, and that's where people get these rushes and energy as this like a dam kind of breaking. So yeah, I guess I can't emphasize enough how important that is, but it also does take quite a lot of skill, mostly on the ability to sense where things are, and that took me a long while. But that's something that I think everybody, you know, should aspire to develop. You know, that skill of sensing that energy flow, especially into the tips of those fingers. So that's something I really do cover a lot in the advanced course, because it's a little bit too intense for beginners to kind of understand that way. I touch on it in the online course, but I tell people, you know, because some people end up going too hard, or not sensitively enough, and it could actually be dangerous if done in a way without empathy or without sensitivity. But it's something that's fascinated me, especially for the last 15 years, is the ends of the bands and working on that subtle level, and the power that it can produce. And it also makes it that you don't tend to get any bad pain, you don't get much bruising, you don't get many negative side effects that you would if you were just going to go in with some deep elbows into the hips or the legs or the calves. You know, not that you'd hardly ever want to use elbows on the calves anyway, but you know, some of that deep stuff can actually, what I learned is through experience, it can be detrimental a little bit too. So
I kind of have so the level of sensitivity in a person can drastically change just from a day to a day, depends on the level of stress that they have at that point or during the day. So, for example, if I was massaging a person, I try to memorize feeling for that pressure, how much I need, like being in tune with that. And person comes and the level of pressure that I was doing on is not different, but their emotional state of mind at that point was so intense that a
Hmm.
little bit of touch, and especially around the calves and the legs, of course,
Hmm.
it's just like I didn't know how to really even do a massage at that point. The person is willing to, it's not, it's a green light. Okay, I will hold as much as I can to the reasonable level, that pressure, pain threshold. But literally putting my hand on the skin was already like a boom, like a
Yeah.
causing like a reaction. I I don't know, Brandon, how are you like doing that? Because I tried to kind of apply a balm, if I need a cream or a balm or something they're going to relax, like for example, Voltaren, I have a tendency to use that in order to relax the muscles and
Yeah.
person to be able to work on that particular day or
Hmm.
just kind of implement something else. How would you approach?
So I've had similar situations where I still remember an aha moment as to what you're talking about. And I was working on this guy, and everywhere he was jumpy and ticklish, and I felt like I couldn't do anything until I massaged his head. And once I massaged his head and I calmed his mind down, I could actually get into his belly. And there was
Mhm.
another instance where I remember a similar sort of situation, not quite as intense as that guy, but I worked on this girl, and at the very end, because when I first learned massage, we were taught, oh, at the very end, you do a head massage to kind of relax them. And I did this head massage, and then I was like, wow, she's so much more relaxed now. I could actually get into her body, whereas before she was kind of jumpy and like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And I did the head massage, like, and so now a lot of the time I start, especially with somebody like what you're talking about, I'll start with maybe 10 or 15 minutes of a deep head massage. Obviously not where they're going to tighten up against me, but enough to sort of relax the brain, get those brain wavelengths into a deeper state. I was just Googling
Mhm.
and researching a lot more about the effects of Raynor massage on brain wavelengths, and yeah, I just wrote an article about it actually recently. I could share that with you guys. You just Google it, Raynor massage brain wavelengths. But we want the person to go into that deeper state of consciousness, like a meditative state. So what I do is I start with that head massage, get them to calm their mind down, and then I do assisted belly breathing. Because one of the other attributes of somebody that can't handle deep massage, like everywhere is jumpy on their bodies, that they can't deep, they're so full of tension that you can't add anything to it. And what I call the mechanism or the channel of releasing, which is the connection between the head and the belly, isn't open. All right. So I'll massage their head, and especially work on areas like around this area, which is the third eye chakra in Ayurveda, and the jaw, and just but eventually I just want them to kind of like start to just let go and go inside themselves. Then I want them to deep breathe before I even touch any of the bands, any of the tension, especially on a person like that, because they are so, it's kind of like they're jammed up with congested energy, and you can't touch it because they just go, they freeze up, they just block you, right? So you need to open up that channel and clear that channel of all the debris. It's kind of like a garbage disposal unit that's clogged up. You got to open that channel before you add more to it. Okay. Because I always look at this, the deep breathing channel, connecting into what we call the hara, just below the dantian, which is about an inch or two below the belly button, is an area that we need to open. And in Ayurveda, we have what we call the Sushumna, which is the central energy channel that connects all the different chakras on the energy center. So we need a person to kind of go into that state of a calm mind and then just deep breathing in a non-judgmental frame of mind on themselves. And what I mean by non-judgmental frame of mind is sometimes we judge our own emotions. Like Like we judge our own sadness, we judge our own anger, we judge, and we're like, oh, I don't, that's bad. I'll shove that down. And if we're in that frame of mind where we're judging our emotions, they're not going to come out and get out of our body. Okay. So a person has to be there. And the other thing is I look at the tight jaw. The tight jaw clamps down
Mhm.
on our emotions and it won't allow us to release. Okay. And that's also somebody that's been told, like as a kid, to shut up all the time or don't speak your mind. You know, what you got to say isn't important. So they're always not really honoring their truth, which is down in their lower chakras, in their belly, in their hara. And they're not connecting between their hara and their head. So we want to check for that and make sure how tight is their jaw. Because if they've got a tight jaw, we need to loosen it a little bit. Obviously, it's painful. It can come from the thumbs. That outer thumb band comes right up here and into the jaw. So I look for that as well. And I might then start my treatment with that. Well, not sorry. I'd always start my treatment in a situation like you're talking about with a head massage and assisted belly breathing. But if I notice then a tight jaw, I might not go to their legs. I might go to their thumb and open that up as much as I can. Because if a person's not going to let out their emotions or their anger or their sadness when we're working on their belly, it's not going anywhere. It's just going to be trapped. It's going to feel like you're fighting it, right? And that's where the jaw comes into it. The jaw holds it down. So it's very important on that emotional and energetic level to check for that. And a lot of people have tight jaws. You know, it's like 50%
Oh,
of people, you know, at
oh,
least, you know,
yeah,
it's
definitely.
hard. You know, we should all be working on our jaws, you know, on a regular basis. So that's what I would be doing. I wouldn't be kind of going in, even the painkillers and all that. You could actually bruise the person because it's like a person that's completely, what you're describing is a person like what I call like almost completely full of tension. I mean, obviously people can add more and risk heart attacks and risk strokes and, you
Oh,
know, all that kind of stuff, you
like
know.
it is that level, like almost like a explosion,
Explosion, yeah.
like
So
implosion. I don't know how to, like something
yeah,
that is like a so intense. And when you mention the Jaws, I remember doing at one point Jaws, and she was saying, "I never felt this before. Someone massaging my jaw, and like just there was such a release,
yeah,
and there was a point where I was actually, I'm not like I'm just absolutely sure I was able to see that tension, just not even touching it." Like
right.
that is here is just kind of feel it that is sitting here somewhere.
Yeah, so whenever I see there's a video of me working on a lady actually where she had such a tight jaw and I opened that up and a massive emotional release came out from the jaw because the jaw, it's like, you know, people talk about keeping a lid on it. There's an expression in English, you know, keep a lid on things, or even in England, they have that tight, what is it, stiff upper lip or something like that, you know? And it's all about like keeping your emotions down, but keeping this kind of front, you know. I think even in Asian countries they have that. You know, they have a word in Japanese for your social face and your. It's like a mask, you know. But it's like the jaw is something that I've understood to be so important in what we're doing because with a tight jaw, uh, you can't release the rest of the body unless they actually are willing to open that up because that tight jaw is also on an emotional level signifying keep it down, keep it down, keep it down. And if we've got somebody with a keep it down, keep it down, keep it down attitude going on, and we're having an attitude of bring it up, bring it up, bring it up, uh, you know, somebody's got to win on this. You know what I mean? And really, they're in charge of their body. So in the end, they'll win because they'll push you off. They'll just like, you know, so you've got to kind of go more of like a yin approach, which is to calm their mind and get them into a deeper state of relaxation where they can actually just let go of that. They're kind of drifting off, you know, into that deeper brainwave length, basically, where they can let go. Because that's what it's all about is those two words, let go of your tension, you know. And with that certain frames of mind, when we're in a certain you know, particular attitude, not just attitude, but you know, when we're in that kind of got to do shit, got to do stuff, I got to do that. We're not letting go. We're busy with the mind, and we got to control life as well. You know, whereas the reality is we can't really control everything. We can't control death. We can't, you know, like the world is filled with different things that we can't control. You know, otherwise it would be a lot nicer world probably if some of us could. Some of us, you know, don't create it. But that's what I see is underneath it, you know, is that control, you know, where's that feeling. And so when people actually have this emotional release, they can often feel like I'm out of control, you know, oh my gosh, all this emotion came up. I was crying like I was out of control, or I just had this anger come up, and this and that and the other, right? And that jaw, that tight jaw, keeps all that in, and that energy of anger or sadness or whatever is creating the tension. So we're not going to get rid of that tension without that energy being released. And that energy's got to be released through the mouth. And if the jaw is tight, it's not going to come out. So that's like it's kind of like a, what do you call it? Those charts, flow chart. Like where you got to proceed with a treatment. Almost everybody you could start with a head. All right. There's never, and then you can just assess how tight they are. Sorry, I just did with somebody else here. Um, you can assess how tight they are uh, based on, how tight is their jaw? Are they able to deep breathe? That's one of my first assessments. Can they relax their mind, and can they breathe into their hara, into their deep breathing? Because if somebody deep breathes, it's actually going to take away that control mechanism of the mind and the tightness of the jaw and the tightness of the neck. Oh, you just start to deep breathe and to be able to let sound out. That's so important without trying to go, oh, I can't let any sound out. Somebody who's like, oh, I shouldn't make a noise. I shouldn't sigh. I shouldn't do this. You should be able to just have a free feeling of that energy from your belly coming out, so that's why I do, like, when I start a treatment, I start with a head massage, and then I do a lot of assisted belly breathing on almost all treatments. That's kind of, especially if I don't know a person, but particularly in the case that you're describing, where the person, you can't touch them basically. That's the I've had students even in my class who, once I do this like yoga nidra kind of breathing, where I get people to become aware of each part of their body, breathe into them, and relax. But when they breathe into it, they're breathing into their hara, into below their belly button, into this dantian area in Chinese medicine. And you're just breathing out without any judgment on the noise you're making, and you're just consciously bringing awareness to relax that body. And when we look at that word relax, it actually means bring back to looseness. Re means bring back, lax means loose. So when you look at the actual word meaning of relaxation or relax, it's bring back to looseness, which is what we're trying to do. Okay, so we have it, that partnership model of medicine. I hope, yeah. We have it, that partnership model of medicine, where the person's deep breathing and consciously trying to relax their body, and then we're like we're giving them like a guided tour of their body. Hey, breathe into this, relax this, let it go. You're holding tight wherever it's painful. Usually is tightness. It's and so they got to breathe into it and let it go. And that's kind of like setting the tone for any treatment, in my opinion, even before we get into bands and before we get into, like, even what I was talking about before, working the ends of tension. Because if we work the ends of the bands, coming into those fingers and toes, but the person's not in a frame of mind where they're actually letting it go, what happens to that energy? It just moves around their body, possibly causing them a headache or making them feel weird in some way or another, right? So we got to, before we even do that, is we've got to have what I call this central energy channel of release open, okay, which is a relaxed mind, a non-judgmental frame of mind, and particularly a relaxed jaw, and a freedom to feel, let the noise out, because the noise is like trapped energy. Like there's different. It's interesting what's in people is like sound. Sound has energy to it, and the sounds of anger, the sounds of sadness, the sounds are all trapped in us. Okay, so it's kind of like, I practice mantra meditation sometimes, and that's like a purification. But the sounds that we've got in us are more like negative sounds. The sound of anger is kind of like an ugly sound, but it needs to come out. The sound of sadness. And that's only going to come out through us vocalizing or letting that noise out with a loose jaw that's non-judgmental. We're not trying to fake anything. Like, I've had students try and fake emotional releases. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to actually breathe into our belly, and whatever's in our belly, let it out. Because then we've got this central energy channel nice and open, and everything flowing. Okay, it's like, I mean, I often call it a garbage disposal unit, because it is. It's just crap, or sewage. It's a bunch of sewage coming out. But sometimes with some people, the energy is so bad that comes out. So that's the only comparison that's realistic. Um, Once we've got that going, then we can feed that with the feet. We can feed that from the toes. We can feed that from the fingers. Whatever band's tight, and it's got somewhere to go. It's got to be able to flow out. So that's really important as you come into more advanced treatments, is just relax the head, open the jaw, and get the breathing going, the deep breathing. And before you do any, so that's like setting the stage, because otherwise we can't feed that garbage disposal unit. It's clogged up, you know. I on my property in Australia, I do a lot of mulching. Like we got 17 acres, so we always got branches falling. And I know that with a mulcher, if you put too much in it, it clogs up and it can't handle it, right? So this is whereas you got to feed it with sticks enough that it's not overwhelming it. And that's kind of like what this central energy channel is like. It's kind of like a mulcher for all the crappy energy. And when you think about it, like the crappy energy becomes tight. We become very, very tight with crappy energy. Whereas a mulcher breaks all that open, just like the a branch from a tree becomes mulch through a mulcher. So I like that comparison. I find that really useful. But I'm a gardener, so I like that. But I'm sure there's other analogies that you could find that might be more relevant to you guys. But that's how I look at it. We got to keep that. We feed that mulcher. Okay, it is called regulated release. We don't want to overwhelm the person, and you can see that a person getting overwhelmed if they start to breathe really fast and shallow. That means that there's too much. You gotta watch that breath. You gotta watch it, and you gotta go, okay, let's feed it. It's ready for more, but let's not overwhelm it. And that's the art form. Just like even like I said, there's an art form in using a mulcher in a garden, not to overwhelm that mulcher, but to make sure you're getting the job done at the same time. You don't want to be so ineffective. You're not so that's what I'm doing when I'm working on somebody. I relax their mind, open up their jaw, get their belly going, and then I start to feed it from the feet or from the hands, especially with a tight jaw. I'll come into this point, but I'll work the entire thumb to really come up here and affect the tightness that can be coming from the outer thumb band, and to a certain extent, the outer wristband as well. The outer wristband comes a bit higher up underneath the ear, but both those bands could be affecting the jaw, and so working them might be my stage. So if I'm setting a particular strategy or whatever approach to working with a person, then that would be my strategy. And then I start to feed it with their legs or their feet. All the while we want this non-judgmental frame of mind and this deep breathing going on, basically. So just letting go without any judgment, and then the person's going to definitely relax, bring back to a state of looseness. I love that word, because some people think relaxation massage is actually just light and superficial, but it's not. Raynor Massage is the ultimate relaxation massage, actually, because it brings us back to a state of looseness. That's the goal. That's the complete goal of what Raynor Massage is: to find and get rid of anything, any tightness, any blockage of energy that's stopping us from being relaxed. Thanks, Sajid. Nice. Thanks for your message. So that's what I would do. I mean, obviously, we've always got to make our own strategy for everybody, and it's like, that's the art form of this. Is like there's no one approach that suits everybody. I always say make the massage suit the person, not the person suit the massage. We've got to, design our strategy. And sometimes there's what I call a toing and throwing. Like you think you might, oh, I met somebody like this before, I'll use this approach. But then maybe it doesn't work because the person's actually a unique individual. Or as you said, it can be a day-to-day thing. Like I was working on them last week, and they could handle it really deep, and all of a sudden they're a bit sensitive. Well, you don't know what happened that week. Maybe they didn't get a good night's sleep. Maybe they had some bad news. Maybe something's going on for them that they may or may not even share. I've suddenly experienced that in my own life. There's days where I'm ready for deep massage because that could involve deep transformation, and I have to look at certain things about myself that I may or may not be ready for, or hopefully on that day I am ready for. But there's other days where I'm kind of like, I don't really feel like like a deep transformation today, especially when I'm tired, or something like that. There may be other circumstances where we just need to work with that person. It's that art form. I'm always thinking, if you just keep that mentality, how can I help this person? And then everything else, like, is in like a tool in your tool bag. like the techniques, the ideas of bands, not just ideas, the reality of bands. But should I work the bands? Should I work the head? Should I work the jaw? Should I do assisted belly breathing? They're all tools in your tool bag, which you then, as an artist, you go, should I pull this tool out or should I pull that tool out? What does the person need? That's always going to dictate what treatment or what approach I should use. So that's the key thing of maintaining artistic integrity there, and kind of going, well, what should I use today to help this person? And you always just do the best you can, right? That's all you can do. You never there's no such thing as like a perfection. If you're doing the best you can, the person usually appreciates it, and hopefully you get a good result. You're not, you don't set your standard so high, like I'm going to get rid of all this person's tension in an hour or 2 hours. It's unrealistic, and then you're just going to be disappointed because most people take a lot of time, even during what I call the excavation process. So the excavation process is that process of getting a person. They just come to you, maybe they're 50 years old, 55 or whatever, and they've had a lifetime worth of stress and tension and trauma and all sorts of stuff, right? And that excavation process is what I said, in an under 50-year-old could take 10 to 40 hours. Over 50 could take 40 to 100 hours. You might be treating them for 2 to 4 hours a week over 6 months, to really get that person to what I call a tension-free state, which is really important to try and get there yourself at any stage, and to have been there once, at least. But also, then once that person's there, they're going to go, wow, I never really want to get back to where I was before. And then you move them into maintenance, because life has its stresses. We have our different things. We have different stresses that are going to happen. It's not like, oh, I got that person tension free. 10 years later, they're going to be tension free. That's not how it works. But they're not going to be suffering from what happened when they were a kid anymore. They're going to be suffering from what happened over that next 10 years. But that's not the way to treat. The best way to treat then is to maintain them. So get them to come back. But it might be only that they need an hour every week or an hour every month or something like that, depending upon the person and what they're going through. And different people have different levels of stress in their life. I'm always saying, if you're working with emergency services workers, they might need 2 hours a week, but it depends on the time. If they're helping earthquake survivors or something, well, geez, that's building up your tension and stress very quickly. So they might need it more often, you know. Um, fire people pulling people out of car accidents, or what I mean. That's really traumatic for people. So whereas a guy surfing, he's just gonna on a surfing holiday, and he's just getting some tension from the waves and all that kind of, what I mean. It's like it might need less. He's still getting tense because he's doing some physical activity, but at least it's not as emotionally intense. So maintenance massage is just, it depends on the person how often they need it, but you can tell by doing that treatment. Say you do 2 hours every month, can you get that person back to a state where they're almost completely loose again? All right, that's how we define. If not, maybe they need more. If you got them back in an hour, then they only need an hour a month. And you can move your treatments like that. So that's the key thing is that most excavation, and from what you're describing, Sky, it could be 50, 60 hours of work. So then you think, when you're planning your treatment, you think, okay, my first 2 or 3 hours, I got to get this guy breathing. And that's pretty much with it. Get them breathing. They got to breathe deeply. Otherwise, it's kind of like, if they're not breathing deeply, when you try and shift tension, it's not going to come out. It's just going to move inside the body. All right. So first thing, relax the mind, get them breathing. And that's a training thing. A lot of people say, oh, I've never breathed this deep before in my life. So that's a key thing, and then that'll actually help them in their daily life to be able to process emotions and energy buildup. Just being able to take a sigh, you know what I mean, and just kind of relax a bit, and get that deep breathing, and just let them come back their energy into their hara, which is around their belly. Yeah, so I hope that helps.